Hey there everyone, I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox and you are watching episode number 63 of the weekly Ratchet. In this episode I will be talking about some of the biggest modern board games in the hobby, whether they are big in popularity, in size, or in complexity. And with all that in store here on this big ambitious episode, let's get right to it on the weekly Ratchet. Hey there everyone and welcome back to the Weekly Ratchet. As always, I hope you've had a fantastic week of getting to play some games with family and or friends. I have got a lot of games here to talk about in this episode. As I mentioned, some very big games, whether again, big in size or popularity or complexity. And so I'm not going to waste your time with a lot of fiddle faddle at the top of the show here, mainly because I have spent this entire past week prepping for one of these games. And you might already have an idea of which one that is, but let's go ahead and get into some new games first off. Okay, just a couple games here at the top of the show. Up first is Detective, a modern crime board game. This is from Ignacy Trzewiczek, designer of such games as Robinson Crusoe and the Imperial Settlers and Imperial Settlers Empires of the North games, that latter being one of my favorite games, as a matter of fact. This is not big in scope or popularity or even necessarily complexity, but I always felt that this was kind of a big ambitious game because it's obviously a crime-solving game, but you're going to be using things outside of this box to solve some of these puzzles, mainly using the internet. It actually tells you that you'll have to use everything at your disposal, not even the things that are going to be presented to you in the box. I always thought that was kind of interesting. I had never bothered to pick this up because I thought it was just going to be too much for us, and really just a game that I didn't really know if we'd ever get into, but my wife actually grabbed this at a local sort of a thrift store, a secondhand store, for $5, and everything in it, the box is open and the corners are a little dinged up, but everything in it is actually still in shrink, so thankfully it should all be there, and hopefully we'll get to check this out at some point. Detective. Up next is in fact a big box, a big heavy box. This is the Alhambra Big Box Edition. Now, I talked about Alhambra in the last episode. My buddy Mike had me over to play it with his friend Nathan, who you're going to hear about again in a moment. But we played this, and I didn't love it, but I didn't dislike it. I thought it did some interesting stuff, and I really wondered if there were any expansions that might kind of open up the complexity of the game. This comes with, I believe, 5 or 6 expansions, 5 expansions. And the very first one is sort of a money conversion ability, which is what I thought was kind of lacking from the original game. Now, Alhambra came out in 2003. This is from 2006. I was actually able to get this for quite cheap. And so I'm looking forward to checking this out. You might be able to tell it's still in shrink. I'm almost kind of hoping that maybe we'll be able to get to this even a little bit later on today. We shall see. That is it for new games. Let's talk about Question of the Week. All right, last week I asked you to tell me your thoughts on listening to music while playing games. And I kind of knew that I was obviously going to get 3 camps, right? Yes, no, and right? Could go either way. I was also expecting to see a lot of common answers, and I did. But I was also surprised at how much alignment there really was on one particular answer. So I'm going to kind of group some of these together in the interest of time, and because I can't just kind of keep repeating the same agreement or disagreement, whatever, the same comment over and over again. So first up was Rentless, who said yes, he likes ambient music, music without lyrics, like musical scores used in the background of video games. So he was mentioning games like EVE Online. Someone else mentioned music from Skyrim as just sort of background music that you could use to play a board game. And I thought that was a pretty interesting idea. I might have to look into that. Wayne Kruger also said yes, that he likes to play soundtracks that fit the theme of the game. Mike Heller also said that he likes to find ambient music that fits the theme of the game. Nothing too loud, just music that enhances the atmosphere. Yeah, you're going to hear a lot of that is music that sort of ties into the theme of the game. And I'll chat about that here in a little bit, a little later. Troy Herring, a first-time poster, said absolutely in stereo, yes. He said that they listen to music more than television in their household, expressing an interest in pop or popular music genres. Now, that's going to be another topic that we're going to sort of see evolve out of some of this, is that people who are listening to ambient or background music versus just popular music with lyrics, music you might hear on the radio, for example. And we'll see some more of that play out here in a little bit. C.R. Pohl said that he'd like white or pink noise music or quiet Japanese mandalas. Now, I had to look this up because Japanese mandala is like a temple, sort of a Buddhist type thing. I'm wondering if you meant marimbas? I'm not really sure. You might need to clarify that for me. Spastic Geek said they definitely have to have music not loud enough to interrupt conversation, but just to add some background noise. And I've done that as well, but if I want background noise, I typically want something like a TV show. We actually love, and I won't go into this, I promise, but we love watching Clarkson's Farm on Amazon. We've watched it way too many times, to the point that I know the dialogue. I know what's happening. I don't really need to pay attention to it. It's just background. Sometimes music, sometimes dialogue, sometimes a line that I can kind of just recite from memory or whatever. And that for me is less distracting than actual music. We'll talk about that more in a little bit as well. Jeremy Brooks said he has a playlist of music he likes to use at home at a low volume. He said it's nice to have in the background while players are mulling over their turns, but he'd never take it to a public gaming event. And that's fair, right? You certainly don't want to sort of force your interest in music on other players in a public event who may not be into it. So I think that's a very respectful thing to do. Omar Hernandez said he does play music, that he has a library of songs he plays from his personal server, and that on occasion he'll do mood music specific to the game. Again, the idea of thematic music. Awkward Meeple said it would depend on the music. Definitely no headbanging rock at full blast, but maybe some ambient piano or soft jazz in the background, or of course, some thematic music for a thematic game. Josh Knight said he normally has music playing in the background, aiming for something thematic for games like Gloomhaven, but that sometimes he just puts on some of his favorite music for the heck of it. Now, for the next couple of comments, we're going to have folks who are kind of in between. So first was Penny, who said she likes thematic music for thematic games, like the Aliens soundtrack when they play Nemesis, but wouldn't like loud music during a Euro game. And Yukon Zach said that they'll have some first wave or yacht rock on in the background sometimes, but that if the game requires some extra concentration, the volume will be low or off, as it can be distracting. And yeah, I think that's one thing we're going to see as we get into these next couple of comments from people who don't like listening to music, is that a lot of folks do see it as a distraction. So up first was Teshra, who said generally no to music, but that it is a general rule for him in life, as music for him is a bit too distracting. And Teshra, you made a comment, and I wanted to address it personally because you talked about being ADD. You also made a comment about you were diagnosed before the H was added, as was I. And I agree that music can distract me in a lot of ways, more than just, obviously when playing games, although I will say, and maybe it's the same for you, I don't know, but sometimes I really cherish that distraction. I cherish the ability to get lost in music, and I'll talk about that again here in just a moment. Wonderflonium said he's generally not a fan of music playing in the background, but can tolerate some thematic instrumentals. And lastly, Weston said no on music, adding that it can be a distraction and can be hard to hear people talking if it's too loud. So I was surprised at how many people said they would like to listen to music. I generally don't because of the distraction. And for me, and in my sort of like rehearsal of this episode, I talked way too long about this. I'm going to try and make it quick. I actually have a music degree. I've been playing cello since I was 8 years old. I think some folks know that. I've probably talked about that before. And I am ADD, and I can get completely lost in a song. My favorite band, when I'm listening to their music, I know a lot of the words, but it's more like the melodies for me. It's more about the high notes and the real impactful sounds. And I love embracing the guitar riffs, that cymbal hit right on that off note. One of my favorite songs from them has chimes between some of the lines of the chorus. And if I'm listening here, I have a TV on the wall. If I'm listening to it here, I get annoyed if I can't hear some of those riffs because the music's too soft or the speakers just aren't good enough on the TV, if we're honest, and I can't pick up some of those effects. And it annoys me, and I'm looking for it, and I'm feeling it, and I'm just not paying attention to what I'm doing. So I typically don't listen to music. And one of my recent playthroughs here at the house, it was a 2-player game, and I did put on some music because there was a lot of downtime between our turns, even in just a 2-player game. And I actually kind of felt that the music sort of helped distract me from almost my impatience, if you will, during that downtime. Okay, I'm going to focus on this music. And I'm not really paying attention to how long I'm waiting for my turn, if that makes sense. The only time I've tried to do ambient or theme music, we played Distilled. One of the first times that we played Distilled. And Dave Beck, the designer of the game, had kind of released a series of tracks that was ambient music. I didn't really know what I was expecting, but all it really was just the sounds of a bar. It was drinks being poured and clinking of glasses and kind of like, just sound effects almost. And after maybe 20 minutes of it, God, I hate this. What is this? This is ridiculous. I don't like listening to this at a bar. I certainly don't want to listen to it in my game room, so I turned it off. But anyways, I thought it was interesting. And in fact, as I was reading some of these comments, I kind of realized that only a few times have I turned on music here in the game room if I just want, again, something that kind of maybe de-stress me or take me away from some of the other things that I'm mulling over even while I'm still playing a game. And I've realized that I haven't always asked my fellow gamers if that's okay. Maybe it's distracting to them, and I'm going to try and work on that going forward. Anyways, that is question of the week. Time to talk about some games. Okay, time to talk about some recently played games. The first one is admittedly a little iffy on the whole big theme, although it is a fairly popular title, at least part of a very, very popular title. This was Catan Starfarer's Duel. Now, I mentioned last week I picked this up on my birthday, kind of a little gift to myself, if you will. I have not ever played original Catan, and I never played Starfarers, although I knew that it was, a fairly popular sort of version of the title. Of course, Starfarers is a 3-player minimum game, and I think it works like Catan. It's better at higher player counts. This is specifically a 2-player game, and I was really excited to get into this, especially as I read the rules and I saw that you've got this big giant spaceship that you're sort of upgrading throughout play. You're trying to add new modules to it. You can actually upgrade some of the physical pieces of this game with little rocket boosters, little lasers. You can actually swap out almost like puzzle pieces, and you're doing that by collecting resources. Now, you're getting resources by chucking a die at the beginning of each one of your turns, and anything that you have on your ship or sort of like planets or trade unions that you have acquired throughout the game may generate resources for you. But then what you're doing is exploring these 4 distinct sort of locations in space that are represented by a deck of cards. You'll get to see a number of these cards, again determined by that dice roll plus some upgrades to your ship, and your opponent will reveal those cards one at a time, and you'll sort of choose whether you're going to resolve them or ignore them, unless it is a pirate, in which case you must fight them unless you pay them to go away. You do start off with a whole bunch of money that you will spend very quickly and then struggle to make any more money. Now, I thought all that was really neat until we started playing it. The die that you roll at the beginning of your turn, which may generate resources, will usually do so off of 1s, 2s, or 3s. And then that die will also determine how many of these cards you get to look at in these systems, plus the strength of your rockets on your spaceship. And so I wanted to make sure that I was always going to be able to do a lot of exploring. So I really quickly started working on upgrading the rockets on my ship, and then spent the rest of the game rolling high on that die, which meant that I didn't generate any resources and generally got to look at more cards than were actually in those decks, making it a complete waste to have done that. It also created this kind of downward spiral because I wasn't generating resources. And so even though I got to explore a lot of space cards, I couldn't really do anything because I didn't have any resources. I didn't have any money eventually because I had spent it all on upgrading the ship, that I just could not do anything. There are these planets that kind of come out as you're exploring. You might discover these planets. And there's this idea that as you're sort of triggering things from this deck of cards, you're adding more cards into it, and those kind of get bigger and bigger, more interesting, allegedly, as you get into it. But these planets may come out and they trigger a mission. So if you reveal a certain planet, there may be a mission out for that planet. Generally, it's spending resources. And every time that I came across them, I never had the resources to spend. You also get a lot of these resources. Like I said, you might get a little bit from rolling this die, but you're also going to be discovering locations as you're going through these decks that may generate resources. But usually there's a trade value. So you might be able to buy a resource for a couple of bucks. So for example, our 4th deck, I believe, of this lineup, there were 2 planets in that deck. One that would trade food, a resource, for $4 a piece, and another one that traded food at $1 a piece. And they didn't ever go away. So you could stop at one, buy a bunch of food cheap, then find the other one and sell that food for a ton of money. If they came up in that order, that deck got shuffled every time you'd go into it. And so it just became very, very luck dependent, as Catan kind of is, to be able to do anything. And we got a ways into it. I was so far behind. My wife was able to accomplish every mission she came across just kind of by luck. She was typically rolling lower dice and generating resources on every turn. I was typically rolling higher dice, wasn't generating resources, didn't have any money, came across some pirates who actually destroyed some of the upgrades that I had worked to build. I couldn't replace them because I couldn't afford to. And we finally got to a point where the score was like 7-2. You played a 10, and I just conceded. I said, listen, I'm never going to catch up. It's physically impossible at this point. I hate this game. I don't care to ever play it again. This is the last time it will be on a table in this room. It will go up for sale. Catan, Starfarers, Duel. Do not recommend. The next day, my buddy Daniel came over. We played a couple of games. The first one was Shackleton Base. This one's very big in popularity right now from Pandasaurus Games. I've talked about this here on the channel, I believe, in the last episode, maybe the one before. And I'm not going to really go into this too much. It is a worker placement game. For the most part, you're triggering various actions. You've got a couple of different places you can put your workers. And the first time that I talked about this, I really just didn't know how to talk about it. I hadn't quite figured out the game yet. And I will say that if you're thinking about this, if anything about its theme or whatever interests you, your first play just probably won't go well, unless maybe you watch some really, really good helpful videos or something along those lines. Maybe you do a little bit of a solo game to get your head around it first. The second play of this, it clicked a lot better. I had more of an understanding of what you needed to do, because the first time we played this, and I think I made this comment in the last episode, turn one, I literally had no idea what to do. Where do I even start with this? Again, where are the points coming from? What are the strong things and the weak things? You've got this map of the moon, of the Shackleton crater on the moon. You're able to eventually get these buildings built on it, and what you want to do is occupy one or more sort of rows of the hexagons on this base, because you will at certain points throughout the game be able to trigger that row of the hexagons to either get resources or get money or trigger these corporation bonus tokens that may be along these hexes. And again, I didn't know that early on. Having a play under my belt helped me to see the value of not only trying to have the most value of buildings on a row, but of course have a building on every hex in that row, because then when you place an astronaut along that row to trigger the benefits, you're going to get that astronaut at the end of the round. That's going to trigger off various bonuses of your base. All kinds of other things start to happen in your favor. And what was interesting is I played with Daniel, who had not played it before, and I gave him some of those tips. I said, look, based on our first play, here's a couple things we kind of figured out, keep those in mind. But at one point in the game, you only play for 3 rounds. And I think that it was either at the end of the second round or very, very early in the third round, I lapped the score track, which only goes up to 50 points. And I think I was about 57, 54, 52. I think it was 52. And Daniel was still at around 12. And I was actually kind of feeling bad, because I was like, oof, like skill level, and not skill in gaming, but just familiarity with the game itself has a big impact. Now, again, because I'd given him some of those tips, he did have a turn where he actually scored about 37 points in a single turn. It was very, very impressive, and put himself very close to 50 points. And we actually ended 2 points apart. In close to 100. I can't remember what the final score was. But it's a game, like I said, your first play is going to be a little rough. And there is some variety in these corporations that you're playing with. You're not actually representing the corporations. You're kind of boosting the corporation's efforts. I'm still not exactly sure what that thematic tie-in is. But there's some diversity there, but maybe not so much. Maybe not as much. I don't know that there's as much variety there, at least initially. I still haven't played as all those corporations or played with all those corporations. And I do like the game. I just am worried that even with the variety of these different corporations, it might still feel a little samey after a while. So we'll see. There's a lot of comparison between that and SETI. So far, SETI still has the edge for me, just in the the sort of variety of actions that you can take. SETI, I think, looks better on the table than Shackleton Base, and I think the SETI is just a bit more engaging than Shackleton Base, but I like them both so far. All right, up next, so that took us several hours of that day. We had almost a whole day to do some gaming. The next game he suggested, excuse me, sorry, was Imperium Horizons. This is from David Terzi and Nigel Buckle. This is a Civ game, sort of, with a heavy deck building element, but it is a very, very different deck building game than I can even begin to really describe. There are 2.5 or 4.5 pages of keywords in this game. And there's just so much to it that I really can't get into it. But basically you're trying to play cards, you're trying to trigger various synergies between these cards. Some of them are specific to your faction. There is, of course, a common market of cards that you can acquire, but you can't just go and buy a card. It's not like, okay, on your turn, you're going to get, you're going to play cards, some of them are going to give you money and you're going to buy more cards. It doesn't work like that. Some cards may give you the ability to acquire cards, but they usually come with a consequence. It's called unrest. And if the unrest deck ever runs out, everybody loses. Some of the cards may let you break through for a card, which means you take it without the unrest. But all of what you're eventually trying to do is acquire fame. You're trying to sort of build the fame of your faction. There is a fame deck. There's actually a ton of decks out. The setup of this game is far more lengthy than any deck builder I've ever played because you've got 5 or 6 different types of cards. You start off by arranging them in different categories. You have to remove certain things based on player count, remove certain things based on the variant of the game that you're playing. Each faction has its own rules of where certain cards may go, so you got to get all that set up. Then you put out a couple of common decks, then you combine all the cards back together into a big common deck, and that goes out in the corner, and it is so lengthy of a setup. As with everything that Turtsy seems to do, it's just convoluted and complicated and a little frustrating, to be honest with you. But you're trying to get these fame cards, and they will trigger special abilities for you. But then also, every time that you would run out of cards, whenever you would shuffle your discard and start a new deck, you also get to add a card to your deck from your own personal faction. So even on your own cards, you've got your deck, you've got a Ascension card, you've got a Nations deck, you have a Development deck, you have all these things just for your own faction, and each one's different. Some may not have the Ascension card, some don't have any Development, some don't have any Nation cards, and so as you're playing, you're hopefully adding these into your deck. There's this whole idea where you're kind of limited in how often you can do that. Sometimes you may get extra ways to do it. Like, there's just so many rules, there's so much complexity to it. And I was really nervous to get into it because I hadn't played it in a long time. I hadn't read the rulebook. I've never actually played this version of Imperium. I had the Classics and Legends versions, which were basically the same. Just some of the factions were historical factions, and some of them were imaginary, like the Atlanteans, which is one of my favorites, actually. But I'd never played Horizons. Now, a quick sort of prologue to this, which I've already talked for several minutes about this game, but last week I mentioned playing a game with a new player, someone new who came over to the house. Name was Will, and he had actually mentioned last week that he wanted to try this, and I was like, oof, yeah, okay, I'll see if I can get ready for it. But he had mentioned that he was interested in this particular version of Imperium because it supposedly did away with some of the conflict of the original games and instead added a trade ability that you could trade with other players in a way that sort of helps both of you, and he was really interested in that. And so actually the next day, after playing this with Daniel, I played it with Will. Now, Daniel and I never got to finish. We ran out of time, and he was ahead of me. And interestingly enough, our scores were like low 30s to low 40s. Will came over, and of course, now I kind of knew the game. I kind of knew how to play it. I was able to sort of teach him. Thankfully, he had watched some videos, and we got into it. But the trading element that he was interested in doesn't really fire off that well. You only get a couple of these trade route cards in that common deck. You put one at the bottom of each of these, what they call, I think they're called small decks. So it's going to be a long time before these things even start to pop up. Some of the factions will get a trade card in their deck, but it's not going to be at the beginning of the game. They may not come out for quite a while. And so, yes, there is this aspect of, okay, well, I can activate your trade buildings, and it lets me take the action, but then you get a trade good, and eventually once that card fills up, you can then trigger an income, a profit from that card. You collect all these trade goods. They can do some powerful things, maybe, but it's not something that's there from the beginning of the game, and by the time it kind of shows up, you've almost kind of forgotten about it. You've almost kind of started to figure out the engine of your faction, and the trade thing almost kind of becomes a distraction. It's not. They're good. You can do some neat stuff with them, but you kind of just forget that they're there. And I also found that because you're so immersed in your own faction, you don't even tend to pay attention to what the other players' cards can do. You're kind of playing with this tableau in front of you, And you're like, oh, wait, what? Oh, geez, that's a good ability. Hey, I'm going to trigger that. And that's nice, but maybe by the time you realize it, it's just a little too late. So anyways, I could talk about this game for way too long, and I've got bigger games to talk about, so I'm going to keep moving. But I did like this. I think that playing it back to back like this actually really kind of helped me out, because this game is one of those games that if you sleep too long between plays, you will completely forget how to play it. All those keywords go out the window, and you do not remember how to get into this. So I'm kind of hoping that back to back maybe lock that a little bit more into my brainstem, and maybe I'll be able to revisit this later easier because of that, that experience this past week. We'll see. I do like it, but it's very abstract, and as I mentioned, there's a lot of downtime between turns in this one. Maybe I didn't mention, but I kind of did. So I don't know. It's neat. I do wish that trade thing was more impactful in Imperium Horizons. Okay, next big game is a very big game, because I have spent the past week of my life preparing for Twilight Imperium 4th Edition. I'm not even exactly sure where to start this. I did make myself some notes, so I'm going to bring my little trusty dusty computer back in on this. I played TI4 once before. It was almost exactly 4 years ago, about mid-June of 2021. I played with 3 other players, one who had played the game possibly dozens of times. It was an interesting experience, and I'm not going to get into it, but one thing I definitely learned, and it wasn't a surprise, was that experience plays a huge role in this game. You can be very smart, but if you don't understand everything that this game presents to you, the person who knows it will probably clobber you. So what I had always wanted to do was try and get an experience together of trying to get a game together of equally experienced players. Now, my wife wanted to do sort of a birthday thing for me this past weekend. She was like, why don't we bring some friends over? Our daughter is still out of town, so you can kind of just, have the whole day, and we can play some games and just have a good time. And somewhere in there, I thought, why don't we play this? Because I've got people coming over that I know, that I'm comfortable with. And I started asking them, well, hey, have you played? Everyone was like, oh, maybe once, or Daniel had never played before. And then my one buddy couldn't make it, but he was like, well, our other friend can come, Nathan, who I played Alhambra with. And so long story short, we got into this. And I found out very quickly in the game that Nathan actually knew the game really, really well. He also had played about a dozen times. And so right away I realized I hadn't created the experience that I wanted, because we were not all on equal footing. So here's a few general notes. And there's no way to go through the rules of this. I can't tell you how to play this. It is truly a 4X game. But not all the X's might actually help you score. So first of all, the complexity on this game on Board Game Geek is a 4.34 out of 5. Very, very difficult. I don't really fully agree. The rules of this game really aren't that hard. On your turn, you can do a tactical action, which is usually activating a system, maybe moving that system, producing things in that system, exploring that system, whatever you may be able to do. And that would be your whole turn. You can do a strategic action, which comes from these tiles. There are 8 tiles in the game. And at the beginning of each round, you're sort of drafting these tiles. Now, because we played it again at 4 players, we would each actually get 2 of these action tiles, which in some cases was more powerful, I think, than maybe it should have been for the same player to be able to trigger those 2 things. But I'm not going to get into that now. So that was one of the actions. I basically said, I'm going to trigger this action. I get to take a powerful version of that action, and then everyone else in clockwise order gets to take a slightly weaker version of that action, but they have to spend a resource to be able to do it. Again, not complicated. None of those things are very complicated. The action card tells you exactly what to do and tells what all the other players can do at the cost of whatever resource. So again, not that complicated. Action or combat triggers kind of automatically. The combat has a fairly straightforward sort of sequence of how things work. There is a lot of dice chucking in combat. You got to kind of track your hits. It can get a little messy, but it's not too bad. But the rules in this game come from everywhere. So again, it's not difficult to learn the game. But when you're sitting there on your turn and someone says, okay, well, I'm going to come and I'm going to attack you, you suddenly have to think about what bonus action cards do I have in my hand? There are these action cards that are just can be very, very powerful, very, very swingy. If you have them, you may not. Then you got to think about, what can my faction do? What can my leader do? What can my commander do? Do I have a special unit that can do something? Again, what are these actions I have to play? What are the agendas that have happened in the game already that may affect the outcome of this? What treaties do I have with other players I might be able to use? And it's almost like you need a pause button to say, look, I need to think about this tangled web of possibilities, and that's where the complexity of the game comes from. It's not in the rules. It's in the scope and the breadth of the game. And so that's where I do tend to agree that the game is complicated. But it was actually kind of funny. We hardly ever touched the rule book of this game. We did have a player with us who obviously knew it. We could ask some questions. But for the most part, we pretty much all understood the game with the help of maybe a video or two on YouTube that weren't that long. I mean, most of the teach videos of this are like 30 minutes. And a lot of that time is set up. So next bullet point, though, is that luck is a massive factor in this game. Luck is probably one of the driving, sort of benefits to any player. You can win with experience, but if you have experience and some luck, there's no way anyone can beat you. And a quick example of that is that the Arborek faction, and I'm not going to name players here, but the Arborek faction is sort of this weed faction that can just expand all over the universe. And a card came out, an agenda or a scoring card came out that said control 3 planets with attachments. That means you've obviously taken control of a planet, but then you have made a discovery that makes that planet a little bit better. And so you kind of tuck a card underneath that planet. That planet has an attachment. And the goal was have 3 planets with attachments. The Arborek faction had 2 of them, and the Soul faction, played by me, had another one. There were only 3 that had been discovered at that point in the game. And when that thing flipped over, which actually was not naturally going to flip over. There was an agenda that we all voted on that made another one sort of appear. And the moment that showed up, I knew that a massive target had just been painted on my forehead, because that player was now going to try and take that planet from me, which is going to be way easier than me taking the 2 planets from them, which were covered in weeds. And so it was kind of like, well, crap, I can't do anything to stop this, except for that I could, because previously in the game, I had discovered a relic, which essentially gave me a Death Star ability that I was able to nuke a planet. So later in the game, the Arborek player took my planet from me, and I actually just let them. I retreated. I had a special card, Luck, that let me just walk away. Hey, it's all yours. And on my way out the door, I nuked the damn planet and just literally wiped it off the map, which was a setback for him. Except that in the next round of the game, he gained a technology that let him re-explore a planet that he already controlled, and on his first attempt at doing so, found an attachment. And he immediately set himself up to score that goal anyways. So even though I had kind of just abandoned all hopes of being able to hold that planet and took it off the map, he still used that ability to win the game. So luck is just a huge factor. There are also these action cards I kind of touched upon. You're getting these throughout the game. You can only have a couple of them unless you're the Sorrow faction, and they had an unlimited hand of these cards. And I was also able to kind of cherry pick them a little better, like really kind of procure a honed hand of these. And they could be incredibly powerful. I got one very early in the game that let me actually swap these strategy cards I mentioned with any other player. So at the beginning of the round, I was able to say, look, even though you beat me to it, I'm just going to take it from you and immediately use it to score 2 points in the game. And unfortunately, what that did was sort of the next thing that sort of bothers me about the game is, again, this level of experience. And my next bullet point on this is that the story of the game is the best part. And the strategy of this game is not just on the table. It's not just a matter of, okay, I'm going to move my forces in this way, I'm going to have this special ability, but there's a lot of strategy that you can employ above the table. And it's one thing I think about this game that's actually a bit broken. So early on in the game, I got a 2-point lead. You only played to 10 points, so 2 points is a big deal, and I knew it was. And so I knew that I was kind of painting my own little bullseye on my head. But then the Arborek player told the other players, hey, here's how to stop this guy. Here's how we make sure that he doesn't win. Now, what no one knew was that I'd basically played all of my good stuff. At that moment, I really didn't have any more tricks up my sleeve. But not only had I sort of made myself a target by taking this lead, but this other player sort of coerced other players into targeting me, leaving him alone to then flourish all over the map. And so eventually he became unstoppable. And by the time everyone kind of realized it, it was too late. You couldn't do anything about it. And that is kind of frustrating, because when you're playing a game like this for 7 hours, when your entire day is invested in this, not to mention I spent the entire week like 3D printing card trays to keep things more organized. I had this really neat little display that held those strategy cards. We had a catered dinner. Now that was kind of a birthday thing. I had bought snacks. I had bought fleet stands to keep the ships sort of above the planets, and a little bit more of a thematic feel. And it was really, really nice. It looked really neat on the table until it kind of blotted out all the icons on the board. I didn't really think that one through. But I invested so much time and money into getting ready for this game and playing this game, to then have someone sort of overstep that magical circle, the sphere of influence over a table, when we're all going to sit here and we're going to agree to play this game by a common set of rules, and someone sort of pops their head above that and says, hey, here's how to make sure this guy doesn't win. It's like, well, I mean, are you playing the game, or are you playing the players at that point? And that kind of bummed me out a little bit. Yes, experience is, like I said, one of the determining factors. Experience can trump, I think, in a lot of ways, determination or strategy. If you just know the game and the systems better and sort of know where those things can be, you're just going to have a much stronger time at this. And as I started to say, the story of this game, I think, is the best part of it. The emergent story that comes out of this, there's no apps that are reading things to you. There is lore that you can read, but it's not like in the middle of the game, okay, we stop and we're going to read this paragraph of text. None of that happens. It's what the players are doing that does really make this game interesting. I think that if you could write a novella after you played of the things that sort of happened in that playthrough, that would be fascinating. And so some great notable events. I'm going to share some of these to kind of wrap this up. Beginning of our game, the Nalu faction, which I don't even know too much about their faction. They kind of had some manipulative things that they could do, but they were... they were kind of on the opposite corner of the galaxy, and I didn't really pay that much attention to them. But they went in for a kill shot on the Arborek Weed faction early in the game. They went right for their home planet. The guide kind of left it exposed a little bit. He went in there with a small force, thinking he was going to kind of sneak in and weaken who we thought was going to be the strongest player, and whiffed. It didn't work. Lost the attack, had to retreat, and got out of there. I came in as the sole faction, the only human faction in the game, and I took control of Mechatol Rex, the epicenter of the galaxy, in the very first turn of round 2, which scored me a point. I only did it to score that point. No one else could take that point from me. And that was kind of hey, I'm just gonna get on the board, and I don't really care if I get nuked out of it. Although I did then quickly get a chance to kind of hunker down. I ended up keeping Mechatol Rex for the entire rest of the game. Even at the very end of the game, I kind of abandoned it. I left my ground forces in play, but I took all my ships for an epic thing that I'll get into. I did manage to get the Imperial strategy card, which gave me an extra point at the beginning in the middle of round 2, and that's when everyone's, okay, we're going to go take this guy out. Although, again, nobody ever did. They ended up just keeping me from ever being able to score that system again, which was kind of a bummer. The luck of the draw, I already kind of mentioned. A card came out that all of a sudden put a bullseye on my head for the Arborek faction to try and take a planet from me, and then I nuked it. That was a big epic event in the game, which was a lot of fun. The Yssaril faction got to just collect all these action cards, but then what he kind of did a little unintentionally was that he made a ceasefire agreement with the Nalu faction. Nalu faction? Yeah, Nalu faction. And then he actually made a treaty with me as well, that in fact, if he broke that treaty, he lost a point. And so it kind of made this almost unbreakable bond between us, that I was just protected unless he was going to lose that point, and gaining a point is very hard to do in this game. So that was kind of interesting in that he actually ended up growing himself pretty strong with all these action cards, but then really couldn't put any of it into play because he was walled in by these two players that he had made these agreements with, and then was just trepidatious in some extent for his own score to then break. What then happened was, and the most epic part I think of the whole game was that the Arbrecht faction had gained that extra 2 points. They were now in the lead with, they had 9 points, everyone else's 8 or less. They were going to score at the end of the game 1 extra point. There was nothing we could do to stop it, unless we took out his home system. And I'd actually forgotten this until the very end of the game, that if a player does not control their home faction, their home system, their home planet at the scoring phase of the game, they cannot score any objectives. And so suddenly, my buddy Daniel and I made this late game, not a pact, but we just sort of teamed up in a very non-thematic way, really, because he was just literally giving me stuff to try and help me take out this guy's home base. And I went from the very center of the galaxy all the way through a formidable front wall, got through it, got to his home planet, and engaged in this epic battle that I did ultimately lose. But it was kind of like, what was so interesting is that some of the cards that he was giving me that then I was using were titled things like The Last Stand, War Efforts, Desperate Measures, or something like that, right? That just seemed to really hone in on how diligently we were trying to get the game to go one more round and keep him from winning. And it didn't work, but that was the story of the game. And it's fun now to sit here and talk about it. And those last few rounds were a lot of fun to play, but there were so many things that happened leading up to it that didn't feel fun. And the one thing that for me is that I really wish you could just practice this game. I was talking to my friends about it afterwards that, there were so many times in our playthrough that I was like, I don't know how to process this information. I don't know how to negotiate. I'm giving you physical resources. You're giving me a card that might do something later, and I have no idea how to weigh the value of these things because I just don't have the experience. I don't understand what it all means and what it can all do. And because this game is so hard to get to the table, it's so hard to get the right people around that table, that there's no way to get better at it quickly. 7 hours. We played for 7.5 hours, give or take. And I learned a little bit, but I still have so much more to learn. There's 23 other factions that I will likely never get to experience. And so it's just, it's like, I don't know how to, I don't really even know how to convey what I really feel about it. Like, I love what it does. I respect what it can do. And I almost feel like it'd be more interesting to actually watch than to play. I don't know. That was Twilight Imperium 4th Edition. And it was the focal point, like I said, of my entire week. The only thing that was kind of funny was that after we got done playing, my wife and I went out to a pub last night. And I was like, look, as much as it sounds silly, I want to play another game that I barely have to think about. I almost brought a deck of cards to play Go Fish. I didn't go that low. But I brought Sky Team. We went to our local little speakeasy. We got home at 1 o'clock in the morning this morning. And we played this co-op game, very low key. We landed in Beijing safely from Ashland, Virginia. And it was exactly kind of what I needed. Just a little bit of a palate cleanser. And it was not a big game, but it was a big relief after such a heavy and anxious and stressful game. This was just what I needed to kind of calm down, come back to earth, if you will, and just relax. And we safely landed, like I said, in Beijing in Sky Team. Folks, that is it for recently played games. I know I kind of just waxed on poetic there for a little bit, but I thought someone might find that interesting. So the question for next week is, I want you to tell me, what is your favorite big game, and why is it big for you? I've kind of played a little fast and loose a little bit here today with the theme of big games. Some of them that have, big ambitions, big boxes, big experiences, or maybe just big in a little way to me personally. So tell me, what is your favorite big game and what makes it big for you? It doesn't have to be a big box. It doesn't have to be TI4. It could be a card game, but maybe it's big for you for some special reason. I'd love to hear about it. That'll be the question for next week. And that is the end of episode number 63. As always, folks, thanks for watching. Thanks for all the comments. Welcome to any new posters. Welcome to all the new viewers here on the channel. And I look forward to chatting with you again soon. Cheers.